Guten Tag and welcome to the Bf-109 Warbird Guide. Alright, and welcome back everybody, and I know this one has been very much anticipated by some of you, so we are going to look into what it takes to fly this awesome aircraft within DCS. So kick back and relax and let's get started. We're not going to start right here in the cockpit. We got some preliminary stuff we got to knock out first, and that starts all the way back at the main menu. So let's go look at this. So at the top of your screen, go ahead and click on that cogwheel icon at the top. Get into your main options menu. One of the tabs at the top is labeled Special. Go there. And then scroll down until you find the Bf-109. And here's a couple of options. Very first of which, takeoff assistance. If you guys have rudder pedals, turn this setting completely off. What will end up happening is you will end up fighting against the computer trying to help you out. So if you have pedals, I can't stress this enough, turn that setting completely off. Alright, the next two, aileron and rudder trim. What these sliders do is set the speed for your trim tabs on the aircraft. I'll cover that in more detail later, so if that doesn't make any sense to you right now, trust me, it will later. Same thing down below. If you have rudder pedals, turn off the auto rudder setting. If you have a joystick that's either, say, a twist grip or you don't have a rudder axis available, this will help you out tremendously. Alright, this last option right here, the cockpit camera origin. I have mine set to automatic, and what this will do is, depending on whether or not your gun sight is in the up position so that you can actually look through the gun sight or not, then your viewpoint in the cockpit will change. And I'll demonstrate this again once we get into the cockpit. But like I said, I leave mine set to auto, so whenever the gun sight's down, my head view is centered in the cockpit like it would be, versus off to the side to look down the gun sight. Customized cockpit, there's no option for this. If you download one of the mod cockpits, like one of the English cockpit mods, this is where you would change that setting. Alright, moving on next, we have to detail the engine very briefly. So the DB605 that's in the 109, this is an inverted V12, and you can see this on screen here. And what that means is the crankshaft is located above the cylinder heads in this case. I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts details on why it's designed this way. If you guys do want to learn more about this engine and the Bf-109, go check out Greg's Airplanes and Automotive. Fantastic channel where he covers in great detail the design features of various warbirds, including the Bf-109. I'll leave one of his videos specifically for this engine linked below. So go check out his channel. It's one I enjoy a lot to learn more about these incredible machines. Right here, you see the crankshaft. The cylinder heads are at the bottom of where the engine would be. Real briefly, this helps increase your forward visibility over the nose, especially looking in the downward direction. The cylinder heads feature overhead camshafts, as opposed to a more traditional engine, which would have the camshaft in the middle of the engine with push rods to activate all the valves. Well, since the Germans used overhead camshafts, they did not let that space go to waste. At the front of the engine, you can see the reduction gear unit that would connect to the propeller. The space where the camshaft would normally be occupied if this was a pushrod type engine is actually hollow. This makes room for the cannon barrel for the MK108 30mm cannon. So, again, they did not let this space go to waste. Pretty interesting how they did this. Now, at the back of the engine is the supercharger, and this has an interesting drive system. It's a single stage, but it's a variable speed supercharger. So, and there's a mechanical controller that will set the supercharger speed based on your throttle position. And it greatly simplifies the engine management in this aircraft. The one thing to note, though, this engine does not feature any sort of intercooler. So what that means is whenever you compress air, it gets hot. So most aircraft have a means to cool that down using intercoolers like the P-51, the Spitfire. There really wasn't much room in the 109 to put an intercooler, so they didn't. So all that compressed air feeds directly into the engine through the intake manifold. They did come up with a different solution for that, and that is the methanol water injection system, which leads me to the unique fuel system on this aircraft. Alright, so here on screen we have a side view of the aircraft detailing the fuel system. Right here in the middle, just underneath and behind the pilot, is the main fuel tank. This holds 400 liters of gasoline. At the bottom, you can see a drop tank. That is an optional load you can carry on the aircraft, and it holds an additional 300 liters of gas. Now, this little tank here at the back is a dual-purpose tank, and this is why I wanted to include this segment, is because of that tank in particular. This is a dual-purpose tank, and it can either hold methanol water mixture, also known as MW50, or it can hold gasoline, or it can be empty. There are 3 states that you can choose for this tank, and I'll show you that here in the mission editor here momentarily. When this tank is filled with MW50, that allows you to run your engine at its hardest, so you can get the maximum performance out of this aircraft. And there is a valve that you have to check and select in the cockpit according to the contents of this tank. Now, because this tank could also be filled with gasoline, it's one or the other. Now, if it's filled with gasoline, you want to make sure that this valve is set accordingly in the cockpit, because that determines where the contents of this tank go. Because if that is set incorrectly, instead of methanol water mixture being sprayed into the supercharger and cooling down the intake air, you're going to be spraying raw gasoline. On the flip side of this, if you have MW50 mixture and you have this valve set wrong, you could be putting water into your fuel system. In both scenarios, it's bad for you and your airplane, so this is why I want to call attention to it now. Alright guys, here we are in the mission editor, and the first thing we do is we click on our aircraft, and we want to find the 3 little dots. So we have our special options for the aircraft, and this sets some of the options available to us. So the first drop-down menu is for the MW50 tank that I highlighted a moment ago, and it can either be empty, filled with MW50 so we can max perform our engine, or it can be filled with gasoline. If it's filled with MW50, you get 75 liters of that, good for approximately a half hours of total use of that mixture to max perform the engine. Now, if it's filled with gasoline, you get that tank is completely filled, and it's 118 extra liters of fuel, but you sacrifice performance to have that fuel. This is the only place where you can change the contents of this tank. You cannot do it once you are in the cockpit. This is the only place to do it. Now, obviously, if you're on a multiplayer server, you can't change it there because there's no access to that mission file. However, hopefully it is in the briefing notes what the contents of that tank is, because like I said, if it's either empty or has the wrong fluid in it, you could wreck your engine. Also, here is the flare gun port, which you can either have the flare gun mounted or not, and I'll show you that here once we jump in the cockpit, which I think it's time for us to do. So let's go jump in the cockpit. Alright, here we are in the cockpit. Now, if you guys are already familiarized with the cockpit, feel free to skip ahead to the next chapter. I always mark off the timeline of these guide videos with their respective chapters. So we start here in the cockpit. We notice that our head is a little bit off center. That's because the gun sight's up, just like that option I showed you in the special menu. So go ahead and click that. The gun sight will drop down, and your head and viewpoint will recenter to the center line of the aircraft. Now, I'm going to get the obvious thing out of the way, and that's the flare gun. There is a key bind for the flare gun that you could bind to a joystick button, and you can also mouse over the trigger and fire it that way. And it just fires out the right hand side of the canopy. Now you get a couple of colors of every single flare, and down here on the canopy sill we have this little label that has 4 different colors marked off onto it: white, red, green, and yellow. In order to load a specific color, you just have to click on that the appropriate square. So if I want to load a red flare, I just click on the red button. Whatever is currently loaded will get taken out and a red one put in. Also noted on here is the little tick marks that the virtual pilot scribes onto the label. You get 3 flares of every color, and you can look at that and know how many flares have been fired off. Pretty handy little feature. Now if we wanted to get rid of that, we just call our friendly ground crew, change cabin equipment, and take away the flare pistol.
Copy. Rearming complete.
And there it is. It is gone. Alright, now let's move over to the left-hand canopy wall. Alright, so we start over here on the left-hand canopy wall, and the first thing at the top is the tail wheel lock. It looks very much like the bolt on a bolt-action rifle. If it is down like it is now, the tail wheel is locked. If it is up, the tail wheel is free to pivot, and you have a much easier time taxiing around on the ground. Underneath this is a very important valve, and I'm going to zoom in on it for you. And it's labeled MW Stoff and Craft Stoff. This is that valve for the MW50 tank I was telling you about earlier. MW Stoff is the methanol water mixture that cools down your intake air so you can run this engine at full power. Craft Stoff is fuel, and this is the valve that you need to make sure you set correctly. Below this is just a cockpit vent for your virtual pilot if you think he's getting a little too hot. Underneath this, we have these 2 large wheels that drive chains. The one on the inboard towards the pilot, that is your elevator trim, and this is the only trim you get in this aircraft. Forward of that, to come with it, is this little window with currently showing a 0. If we do forward trim, we get a positive number, so that's nose down. If we go nose up trim, it'll come back the other way and we'll have a negative number. The wheel on the outboard edge, that is your flaps. Flaps up, flaps down. And the position of the flaps, since this is a plain flap design, is the position is marked off with these little stripes on the trailing edge of each flap. And it goes 5, 10, 20, and stops at 30. So 30 degrees is flaps full down, and that's indicated by that red stripe. Alright. Moving forward, we have the throttle quadrant with obviously the throttle. Immediately underneath that is this yellow handled lever that's marked off with ZOO, P1, P2, and P1 plus P2. This is your fuel pump control, and if it's at ZOO, the fuel pumps are off. And this is the pumps in the main tank. There's one at the forward end of the tank, one at the rear end of the tank. So this is how you would turn on the fuel pumps. Normal operation is P1 plus P2. Moving back on the quadrant, we have this other yellow knob. This is how you shut down the engine at the end of your flight. You just raise it, and it shuts down the engine. This, you can think of that as the fuel cutoff. All right. Also on the throttle handle, and I have a terrible time getting my head in the right position, but we have this rocker switch that is part of the propeller pitch control. This is what you use whenever you want to set the prop pitch manually. So one way will increase the prop pitch, the other will decrease the prop pitch. Tying with that is this switch underneath the throttle quadrant. Currently it is set in its manual mode. So manual mode is forward. If it's set to the rear, your propeller governor is set to the automatic mode, and the prop will pitch based on the power setting. All right. Underneath these, we have a couple of pull handles. This one labeled Bombin. This is how you jettison either a bomb that you're carrying on your centerline station or your drop tank. So whenever you want to get rid of either, you just yank that handle and whatever store is loaded will fall off the aircraft. This red handled pull, this is our fuel primer. This is how you prime the engine for before you start it. And this orange handle that's pointing diagonally, this is the left-hand radiator cutoff valve. So a nice feature for combat damage is if you get a hole that punctures your radiator underneath the wings, and let me spin around and show you, you'll see the radiators both on the left wing and right wing respectively. There's their intakes. If you take damage and you see a lot of like a big steam cloud coming out of your left wing, you want to pull that handle, and that cuts off all coolant going to that radiator. Just keep in mind, if you have to do that, you just lost half of your cooling system. So if you continue to run at full power at that point, you will overheat your engine. All right, moving on to the instrument panel. This red pull handle, that is your canopy jettison. Moving below that, we have a couple of guarded switches. So this first one that's horizontal, that guards your starter clutch pull handle. So whenever you call for a cold start, your ground crew will crank your engine, get the flywheel up to speed, and then you pull and hold that handle to crank over the engine. This guarded cover covers the landing gear push buttons. The red button, Flug, that is landing gear up. The blue one marked landing will bring your landing gear down. And that couples with these lights, these status lights just to the right of that panel. 2 green lights indicate down and locked, and you get a green light for each main landing gear, left and right. There's no indicator for the tail wheel. The red light will light whenever the landing gear is up and locked. If none of the lights are lit, that means the gear is in transit from either up to down or down to up. Just to the side of that, we have this switch control that's marked off with 0, M1, M2, M1 plus 2. That is your magnetos that operates all the spark plugs on the engine. Normal position is M1 plus 2. All right. Underneath this is our MK108 for our motor cannon. It defaults to the enabled position. If you need to shut off your cannon for whatever reason, you just click that switch and it'll shut down the cannon so you can't fire it. These 2 horizontal toggle switches. The top one is for your MW50 water methanol injection system. Turning it to the inboard position will enable that system. Turning that to the outboard position will disable it. The switch that's at the bottom, that's also mounted horizontally, that is a useless switch currently. That is, if we had the gondola cannons that would mount underneath the wings, this would turn on and off those cannons. But since that's not an option in DCS currently, the switch does nothing. All right, moving up the panel, we have this big red push button. That is, it's called the kill switch. It does not shut down your engine, but what that will do is anything on your electrical panel, it will immediately shut down all the breakers. Right above that, we have this gauge that is marked off in kilograms per square centimeter. So all pressure gauges, this entire cockpit is in metric, so all pressure gauges read in kilograms per square centimeter. All temperatures are in degrees Celsius. All speeds are in kilometers an hour. Altitude is also measured in kilometers. But that gauge right there is the water pressure gauge for whenever the methanol water 50 system is operating. So whenever your engine's at full power and you have the MW50 system on, this gauge should read pressure. And I'm going to note that any gauge that reads a temperature or pressure will have these neat little triangles showing what the normal range is for whenever that system is in use. Very handy feature. This is a fairly simple cockpit that once you learn your way around it, despite it being in metric, it's easy to work with. All right, moving to the top of the panel, we have this switch right here. It's labeled weapon control on off. You guys can think of this as your master arm switch. So this will turn on and off your weapon system. Just to the right of that, we have a very handy feature on the 109. These are the ammunition and bolt cycle indicators for your MG 131 13mm machine guns. And the normal load for these is 300 rounds, and these gauges are marked off at every 100 rounds, so 100, 200, 300. The top of the stripe is where you read your ammunition remaining. You only have indicators for your machine guns. You do not have an indication for your cannons. The gun sight is obviously right here in front of you, that you can fold it up and down. And just outboard of that, we have a standard clock. All right, I'll move the gun sight out of the way. Now, in the center of the panel, we have a 6-pack of instruments. These are your primary flight instruments. From left to right on the top row, we have our airspeed in kilometers an hour. Center is our attitude indicator, and also turn and bank coordinator. So your slip and skid indicator to the ball is right here on this gauge. The gauge to the right is your vertical velocity indicator, marked off in meters per second. All right, bottom row on the left is our altimeter, and it's marked off in kilometers, and on ground level, that does start in the down position. It's unlike allied altimeters that start at 0 at the top. These start at the bottom as far as the needle sweep goes. This knob at the bottom is how you dial in your QNH, your field barometric pressure, and it's marked off in millimeters of mercury. All right. Center at the bottom row is our gyro compass, and you guys can turn the compass card to line up with your runway whenever you take the runway. This 6 gauge right here is part of the direction finding system. It does work, and I've used it maybe once. I don't know as much about the direction finding system of this aircraft, only because I use other means of navigation, but it does work, and if there's interest, I'll do a video on that system at some point. Alright, moving over to the right hand side of the instrument panel, we have all of our engine and fuel gauges. What is really nice about the 109 is all of the different fluids are uniquely color coded. So anything that is in yellow is fuel related. Anything in red is your oil system. Green is your engine coolant. So starting at the top here, we have a dual purpose gauge. The left hand side of it is your fuel pressure coming from your fuel pumps. And again, you got these handy little triangular indicators showing you the normal range of those systems. On the right hand side, that is your oil pressure. The green gauge, that is your engine coolant temperature. The red gauge underneath that is your oil temperature. The large gauge there, middle, that is your tachometer, so revolutions per minute on your engine. Alright, moving to the right of the tachometer, we have this interesting looking gauge that looks like a clock with no numbers. That is a direct read of your propeller pitch, and the clock hands indicate roughly where the propeller is. Right now it's reading 1230. That is the high RPM, or also known as fine pitch, or flat pitch, if you will. The clock hands wind around backwards all the way around to about the 4 o'clock position at the low RPM or coarse pitch setting. So that's just a good indication of where your propeller is, and also a great indication to know that your automatic propeller control is functioning. All right. Beneath the tachometer, we have the manifold pressure gauge, and this is marked off in units of atmosphere. And you'll hear me refer to that as ATA, which is also units of atmosphere. And right now, it is reading just a slight bit over 1.0. That is reading the ambient air pressure outside the aircraft right now. This red handle is the emergency landing gear release. So if you push the landing gear down button and you don't get a good gear indication, you can pull that handle and hopefully get your gear down. All right, underneath this gauge is, underneath this handle is your main fuel tank level indicator. So it is marked off from 0 to 4, indicating hundreds of liters. The red light that's just outboard of that is the low fuel light, and it triggers whenever there's only 30 liters of fuel remaining in the tank. And per the manual, that's good for about 5 minutes of flight. So hopefully you've been paying attention to this gauge and you've landed long before this light has turned on. But if it does, you may want to find an airfield pretty quick. All right, so this panel just in front of the control stick, this is your bomb control panel. The 109 can carry one single bomb on the center line, and you have these indicator lights down the right-hand side. If you are carrying a bomb, only the top light will be lit, indicating that you have something, you have a bomb hung in the middle of the airplane. The knob here just sets the fusing of the bomb, and I will cover that in detail during the weapons segment. All right, moving on to the right-hand side of the cockpit. So we have this knob right here. This knob, if you pull that knob, will empty the contents of your MW50 tank, whatever it is containing, whether it's MW50 or gasoline. If you need to get rid of that for some reason, pull that knob and you'll empty out that tank. Underneath that, we have this orange-handled control, and it has 4 positions. Pointed down, Zoo, Automatic, and ALF. This is your radiator door controller. And don't fall into the same trap that I did, thinking that ALF means off. That is not the case. ALF actually means open. So there was one flight I did where I took off with this in Zoo, which you can imagine what happens when you got an engine at near full power and the radiator doors are closed. Shortly after takeoff, I overheated, broke the engine, and ended up with a crash. All right, so Zoo is completely closed. Automatic means the doors will open and close automatically, as the word suggests. ALF means the radiator doors will be set to the wide open position. That's the position you want for all ground handling. Once you're in flight, set this to automatic and just keep an eye on your temperature gauge. The bottom position will stop the doors in whatever position they are in whenever you set this control to that position. All right, that red handle underneath that, this is the right-hand radiator cutoff valve. All right, so now we move to the circuit breaker panel. And if you guys have the tooltips turned on in your DCS main options, this will help you tremendously to know what each one of them are. And I'll just go down them from the left column straight down and then the right column. But the top one on the left is your generator. That's what keeps your electrical system going in flight, and it keeps your battery charged up. The one underneath that, the second one, is your pitot heater and windscreen de-ice circuit. Next one down is your navigation lights. The fourth one down is your ultraviolet lights. So this cockpit does feature night lighting, and it uses UV lights through these two little brass-looking holders on either side of the cockpit to illuminate the gauges, and you got phosphorescent paint that'll glow. It's pretty neat to see this thing at night. All right. So the fifth one down is important. That is your wing drop ordnance control circuit. So if you are carrying a bomb, you will definitely want to make sure that fifth circuit is pushed in. Last one down at the bottom, that is your engine ignition. There's a lot of things on this. So your fuel pumps, your MW50 system, your ignition system, everything is on a lot. Well, not everything, but there's an awful lot of stuff on that bottom breaker on the left. All right, moving on to the right-hand column, we have the battery breaker. The radio breaker is the second one down. Third one is your IFF system, interrogate friend or foe. And lastly, we have our electric fuel pumps. Good breakers to know. Alright, moving underneath this, we have a few different things on this panel. The stuff painted in blue is all related to your oxygen system. You have an oxygen blinker, is this first gauge. The one behind it is your oxygen cylinder pressure. And this knob is your oxygen on-off valve. So if you turn that on, you'll get pressure. And the little blinker should start blinking slowly, indicating that your pilot is actually breathing. This little clear sight glass, that is actually part of the fuel system. And if you are carrying a drop tank, you will see fuel flowing through that pipe. And I will show what that looks like when we cover fuel management. Alright, lastly, we have these 4 knobs here in the back. All these are your radio controls. This first 4-position knob that is marked off with 1, 2, triangle, and square, that is your channel selector for your radio. It's a 4-channel radio. This knob over here on the right, that is your fine tuning control. Not much use that I've ever noticed. This one here is your volume control. The toggle switch right here, that determines whether or not that you're having your radio act as a radio or a direction finder. And then you have another mode selector outboard of that. Alright, so that's the cockpit. Let's go ahead and move on to cold starts. Alrighty, and here we are for cold starts. So first things first, I'm going to drop the gun sight out of my view and recenter my head. If you are hopping onto a multiplayer server, I do recommend you check out the briefing notes. And by default, the keyboard shortcut is left, alt, and bravo. So that'll pull up the briefing page. What we're looking for is a note of what the contents of the MW50 tank are. And in my case, it is indeed filled with MW50. That is so we can set the MW50 valve properly, and it's up MW stuff. Perfect. Most multiplayer servers that I've joined usually will have that noted in a briefing somewhere. And if it isn't, there's a method I'll show you guys later in flight how you can determine if that tank is filled with anything at all. It won't let you know what it's filled with, but you'll at least know it's filled with something. Alright. What we want to do is hit our comms menu first, contact the ground crew, and tell them to put in the wheel chocks. Yes, the 109 finally has wheel chocks. That happened earlier last year.
Chief, place the wheel chocks. Copy. Wheel chocks are now in place.
It's very important because the 109 does not have a parking brake at all. What you would have to do before this was you'd have to stand on the toe brakes the whole time while you're starting and warming up the engine. Push in the circuit breakers at the top and bottom of each column. And while you're down in this general area, take the radiator handle and turn it to the ALF position. That opens up your radiator doors to their widest position. You generally would have those wide open for ground ops. Alright, next, move the throttle forward so you can see your boost pump control. That's this yellow knob handle right here. Put it all the way to P1 plus P2. So pump 1 and 2, that is the forward and aft booster pump in the main fuel tank. Alright, next, we want to flip open the cover for the starter clutch. And looking like that is a bit... Oh, and the magnetos. So make sure to turn both sets of magnetos on. So it's right next to the landing gear lights. Turn that control to M1 plus 2. Now at this point, we'll go back to our comms menu, ground crew, and we'll tell them to run the inertial starter. Before I do that, 2 things I want to mention about that. In the description of this video down below, I'll leave a link to a really cool video of a real Bf-109 actually being hand cranked for starting. A ground crew would have to stand on the left wing, turning a hand crank to get the inertial starter up to fast enough speed so that you can pull the starter clutch handle and actually start the engine. It's really cool to see, so yeah, check that out. Alright. While he's doing that also is when I prime the engine, because you get enough time to prime the engine while he's hand cranking. And he'll let you know whenever he's finished hand cranking so you can pull the clutch. Also, the whole time you're holding that clutch, you hold that handle out until the engine either starts or it comes to a complete stop. Now, if you did everything right, like I just showed you, your engine should start. Alright, so go ahead and have him run the starter.
Run the starter. Copy.
Alright, you'll hear it start to wind up. 4 shots of prime. You can do up to 10 shots of prime depending on air temperature outside. So it's a nice warm summer day, so 4 will do. I'm going to stand on the toe brakes, advance the throttle a little bit.
Clear.
Pull the clutch. Keep it held. It's going to sound like it's not going to go. There we go. And be quick on the throttle. You want to get the RPM down to 1200 for warm-up. After this, check all your gauges. Oil pressure has risen. Fuel pressure's in the right spot. Oil temperature will rise. And coolant temperature will rise. But these two right here, the pressures are the most important ones. Now you can come off the toe brakes. Make sure you don't roll because of the wheel chocks. It's just a good habit to stand on your brakes in case you did forget the wheel chocks. They are not on a cold start aircraft by default. That's why I have to mention that. Alright, see you guys after the warm-up. Alright, the engine oil is almost 50 degrees C. That's good. It's above 40, so we can go ahead and start taxiing. So contact the ground crew, have them remove our wheel chocks.
Chief, remove the wheel chocks.
Get on your toe brakes so you don't roll.
Copy. Wheel chocks are now removed.
Excellent. I'll go ahead and close the canopy too. Alright. Now to steer this aircraft, it does not have a steerable tail wheel like I mentioned earlier. But we're going to come off the brakes, go ahead and roll, and you have independent toe brakes, so a little bit of right brake. Runway's off this direction. And then you can come off the throttle as needed so you don't have to constantly be on the brakes. Just do a nice gentle taxi. Now if you do want to do some S-turns every now and then, just go left and right down the taxiway just to make sure the path ahead of you is nice and clear, that you're not going to run into anybody or anything. And our main runway is right here. I'm going to hold short. A couple things to go over real quick. One, nobody's on approach. That's good. Runway is clear. Alright, one thing you want to do now is come down here to your panel. And let's see, let's go ahead and put on my navigation lights. More importantly, I'm going to turn on my pitot heater and windscreen heating. That keeps the pitot heater, or the pitot probe, from getting iced over. And that is that guy out on the left wing. Excellent. Go ahead and close the starter clutch cover. Probably should have done that back before I started taxiing. Alright, at this point I can also flip open the landing gear cover. And we can go ahead and taxi out to the runway. Alright, straighten up on the runway. And over here, we drop our tail wheel lock, which looks, like I said earlier, it looks kind of like the rifle bolt. And as long as it's down, your tail wheel should lock. And give it a little bit of left and right brake, just to make sure that it did indeed lock. So, quick tap, quick tap. I'm not steering left to right, I'm maintaining straight. Go ahead and come to a stop. Alright, we are lined up. Last few checks. Want to make sure our oxygen's turned on. That's this little blue valve right there, and you should see your oxygen pressure rise in the gauge. Tail wheel's locked. I like to set my elevator trim as full forward as possible, so that would be 2 in the little sight window there. You can leave it at 0 and the aircraft will lift off at around the right speed. I personally prefer to have it full forward because I control the liftoff and also the climb rate after I'm airborne. So make sure the starter clutch is closed. Open the landing gear button cover. Verify your radiators are wide open. Another thing I like to do is make sure that my automatic prop governor is set to manual. That's a little switch right here, and it's set forward. And if I use the controller on the end of the throttle there, you should see the clock gauge indicating our prop position. For takeoff, I like to set 12 o'clock. Now let me hop out of the aircraft and show you something on the wing here. I'm going to hold my toe brakes, but watch the wing tip as I throttle up. You notice that the engine torque wants to make the wingtip rise, which means you're going to roll to the left shortly after takeoff. So to counteract that, we're going to use a little bit of right stick and make sure that the wings stay level during our takeoff roll. That effect is a little bit more pronounced as you pick up airspeed. Speaking of airspeed, unlike the Spitfire, the rudder in the 109 is quite small and is not very effective at low speeds. So to control your direction, at least in the first half of the takeoff roll, you'll want to tap your toe brakes as needed. Typically you're going to be on your right toe brake a little bit more because the aircraft tends to pull to the left. Alright, for power settings, my first part of the takeoff roll, I'll throttle up to 0.8, check over my instruments, come off of the brakes, and then smoothly increase to 1.25 ATA. You are allowed to use up to 1.35 ATA on your takeoff roll, but in my experience, 1.25 is sufficient for most airfields. Now, if you are on a short field, you'll probably want to use 1.35 full power, and that'll help you get up to speed in airborne a lot faster. One last thing I want to point out is during the takeoff roll, especially in the warbirds, your eyes should be focused outside the cockpit. You throttle up, give a last quick couple of checks on your instruments, and then your eyes should be focused outside the cockpit, because you will visually see a directional change before your attitude indicator reflects it. If you're chasing the attitude indicator, you're going to get into a bad oscillation, which will lead to a ground loop and then a crash. So you want to avoid that. Keep your eyes outside the window. Also, as soon as you get enough forward airspeed to get the nose down, what I like to do is pick a point down in the distance to focus on and keep my aircraft aligned with that point. It really helps to maintain your directional control. Alright, now I'm going to bring up my controls overlay for you guys. Down there in the corner you can see my brake inputs. You can see my stick inputs and also rudder down on the very bottom. Also, let me bring up the camera so you guys will actually get to see what my feet are doing during the takeoff roll. And also the stick and throttle inputs. Alrighty, and here we go. So throttle up 0.8. Oil pressure, temperatures, everything's looking good. Alright, let's commit to takeoff. Full right rudder. Be ready on the toe brakes. Smoothly increase to 1.25. Once you feel the rudder get effective, you can start using that. Airspeed's alive. I'm going to nose it forward. A little bit of right stick. Around 200 kilometers, I'm going to start liftoff. Excellent. Airborne, positive rate. Push the red button and raise your gear. And you see, even with my elevator trimmed all the way forward, that my it's still wanting to climb significantly. Alright, now at this point, I'm also going to engage the automatic prop control, and we can see our clock gauge starting to move, indicating that the automatic prop governor is doing its job. And then make sure to keep 1.25, double check our airspeed, engines, it's looking good, and we are airborne, everybody. And then at this point, you take over with your flight controls, adjust rudder as needed, and we are airborne. That was a really good takeoff. Now, if you're new to this thing, expect to deviate off of the runway a couple of times. That's normal. I have wrecked plenty of these aircraft in DCS just learning this bird, especially early on. Alright, let's move on to cruise flight and check out engine management. Alright, here we are at a steady flight. I have active pause on right now so I can focus on the gauges for you guys versus anything. One thing I forgot to mention during the takeoff is once you're in a stable climb, take the radiator control down here and set it to automatic. That allows your radiator doors to open and close as needed to maintain your coolant temperature. Now, power settings in the 109 are a lot more simplified compared to any of the American fighters, where you have both your prop and mixture, your prop controls, throttle, where you're having to juggle both manifold pressure and your RPMs. It's a lot more simplified in the 109, especially when you have the automatic prop governor turned on. Alright, so right now I'm at 1.25 ATA on my manifold gauge. This is maximum continuous power, and you can fly all day long at this setting. There is no time limit at max continuous. If you want to throttle back, save some gas, you can pull it back to cruise power, or I'm sorry, economy cruise, and that's about 1.05 ATA. So right about there. And you may have to fine-tune that as your propeller catches up with the new power setting. So this is your most efficient cruise is right around here at 1.05. Now, combat power. Combat power out of the DB605 in this aircraft is 1.35 ATA. And once you get close, let your prop governor catch up, and then check and adjust your manifold pressure as needed. Now, combat power is, you have a half-hour time limit, so 30 minutes time limit at this power setting. You can do this with, or this is without any methanol water 50 mixture, or MW50. Now, if you do have MW50 loaded in your MW50 tank, and by default, if you set up any of your own missions in Mission Editor, that tank is filled with MW50. What you want to do is make sure that your MW50 system is turned on, which is this toggle switch that's sideways right now. If it's facing inboard, that is the on position. And that system is completely automatic. So once it's on, if you throttle up even harder, that system will immediately start spraying the MW50 mixture into your supercharger to help keep the intake air cool. It helps it prevents detonation at high power levels. Now, for war emergency power or full combat power, that is 1.85 ATA. Actually, excuse me, 1.75 on the gauge. So all you got to do to get there is throttle up all the way. So that is full power on the engine. Your manifold pressure is at about 1.75. And more importantly, take a look at your water gauge over here on the left-hand side of the instrument panel. That should, anytime the system is injecting the MW50 mixture, you will have pressure indicated, and it should be between these two little yellow triangles. And you have a 10-minute time limit at this power setting. And then to come out of it, you just throttle back to 1.35. You notice that the MW50 gauge is now showing 0 pressure. It has stopped injecting the MW50 mixture in the supercharger. Alright, now I mentioned earlier that there is a way to determine the contents of the MW50 tank, or at least to know if it's empty or not. If whoever designed the mission did not put in the notes that what is in that MW50 tank. So, what I've done here is, this aircraft is set up specifically to have an empty tank, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on the MW50 system, and I'm going to go ahead and throttle up to full power, and let's watch what happens. MW50 is on, no water pressure is indicated, and you notice that my aircraft is starting to shake. That is detonation in the engine, and if you see that, you need to immediately back off of the power. That means that that MW50 tank is empty. You're getting a ton of hot air going into your engine cylinders, and you are getting detonation that can lead to engine damage and a complete engine failure if you stay in it for too long. Now, if you notice that your upper limit on your engine power is 1.35 ATA, like you see on the gauge right now. Now, before we move on to weapons, I do want to highlight another community contributor that had a direct influence on the 109 as we know it. It is Patty Patron, and he has a fantastic channel showcasing a lot of warbirds in real life at air shows and demonstrations, including Bf-109s, Spitfires, all sorts of really neat airplanes. So go ahead and check out his channel. He showcases a lot of stuff from over in Europe. But he had a direct influence on the audio of the 109, especially all the external audio, which was captured from a real Bf-109. So I want to take a moment and let's listen to this real quick. And this thing sounds amazing. To me, this is one of the best sounding warbirds in DCS. Not to take anything away from any of the other aircraft, but this one just, it just sounds amazing and powerful. I love it. Alright, for flight characteristics, if you remember earlier I mentioned the slider and the special options and these tabs out on the wings. Those are the trim tabs meant for your cruising speed. I'm bringing up my controls overlay. You notice that for level flight, I'm having to maintain a little bit of left stick. Now, the function of those tabs is when you're at a cruising speed, and by default it is at about 350 kilometers, then your stick forces should be completely neutralized. Now you can increase and decrease it based on that slider, and all that does is that the ground crew would have bent those tabs slightly. So if you notice, if I go stick neutral, I'm going to bank, only because I am above the speed where those trim tabs are set for. Now, the 109 is a dream to fly. This thing is incredibly maneuverable. It has the slats that automatically deploy. Does it enhance the performance in a turn fight? Yes. They're more meant for your slow speed, but they do a good job, and this thing is one heck of a turn performer. So that also bled off some speed. There we go, right above 350, and you can see my stick is, I'm hands off of the stick right now, and she's mostly level. But just like every warbird, you may have to nudge it from time to time just to maintain. It's part of the challenge, but man, are these things fun. Alright, let's move on to weapons next. But first, let me show you the keybinds. And let's see, trigger, I have fire machine guns, which is A, and that's set to my Warthog trigger. My weapon release button on the Warthog is set for fire cannons. There is a safety lever that you need to toggle, and that is gun safety lever toggle, which is on the stick. So that will turn on and off the gun safety lever, and I'll show you that once we jump back in the cockpit. There's a weapon release, or bomb release as it's called in there, and that's if you're carrying a bomb on the center station. And lastly, charge MK-108. I have this set to a button as well. And what that does is cycles the bolts on the cannon in order to load a round. Alright, now to turn on your weapons, that is this toggle switch on the instrument panel. Just make sure it's pointed up. And if I go ahead and hit the trigger, nothing happens. So at the top of the stick, you got this little guard. That is that gun safety lever that I was telling you about. That needs to get toggled off, and now you can fire your machine guns. Now, especially if you do a cold start, your cannon is not charged, so what you have to do is push the charge Mark 108, or I'm sorry, charge MK-108 button, which is this little guy at the base of the stick. Push it and hold that for a few seconds. That cycles the bolt on the cannon, and then you'll be able to fire the cannon. Now, up forward, like I mentioned, you have the gun ammo indicators for your 13mm machine guns. And right above them, you got these little circular indicators. That shows you that the bolts are cycling on the machine guns. And those should both rotate whenever you pull the triggers. If one of them does not, and you still have ammunition remaining, that means either one of them has jammed, or you may have taken combat damage and it's knocked out one of your machine guns. So really cool that you get bolt indicators. There is no, you don't have the same for the cannon, unfortunately, so it either works or it doesn't. Now, if the cannon stops firing, cycle the bolt on it to charge it and see if it possibly got jammed, or more than likely you ran out of cannon rounds. Like I said, you only have 60 rounds, so you definitely don't want to waste them, but it is a devastating round because it's 30mm, the largest cannon on the warbirds currently in DCS. Man, this thing just sounds mean. Alright, now if you are carrying the bomb, which we have on the belly station here, if you are carrying a bomb, in order to arm it, you want to make sure that your bomb circuit is turned on, which is the V-101, the wing and drop ordnance circuit breaker. If we look, I'm in active pause, so if I move the stick over, we see a single light on the bomb panel indicating that we have a bomb loaded. We have 4 separate settings. AUS is off, so if I hit the bomb release, nothing's going to come off the aircraft. STIRS is your dive bombing. Vigorect is level bombing. And it's either MV on either one is with a time delay for defusing. OV is without delay. So I'm going to go ahead and come off active pause, and we're going to go ahead and drop the bomb. So MV, you get a red light indicating that the bomb is armed and ready to drop. Right. Throttle back. And I'm just going to bomb a field here. I'm not going to hit anything important. Line up on your target, make sure you don't have any side slip. Bombs away, and pull away. That's all there is to dropping a bomb. Now, we notice that the light for the bomb is extinguished, but our fusing light is still lit. Let's go ahead and turn that off, and we are done as far as the bombs. Alright, now we're going to talk about fuel management in the 109. So, I am carrying the drop tank, and if we look down at the sight glass that's next to our oxygen gauge, which that should be turned on right now. I just swapped into a different aircraft. But if we look at the sight glass, that is indicating that we are transferring fuel from the drop tank into our main tank. And with that, the main tank should be lit, or I'm sorry, the main tank should be indicating a completely full tank. Now, this is a pretty creative solution to knowing when your drop tank is empty, because all tanks feed to the main tank in the 109. So whenever that sight glass is showing nothing but air, that means your drop tank is empty, and you can get rid of it if you want. At that point, the fuel gauge should start decreasing as it would normally. Now, if your MW50 tank was filled with fuel, the lever here would need to be set to craft off, and that will feed also to your main tank as well. But if you know that your MW50 tank is filled with MW50, make absolutely sure that that is set properly, because if that is set to craft off and you have MW50, you're going to be putting water into your gas tank. It's not a good combination there. Alright, one thing, you got this little red light here. That'll come on when you have 30 liters of fuel remaining on board. That is enough for 5 minutes of flight, so hopefully you've noticed that your fuel gauge has been awfully low at that point, because you want to land, and land soon if that light ever comes on. Now, aside from high power applications, the 109 is fairly fuel efficient, especially if you're cruising at 1.05 ATA on your manifold gauge. So you should have no problem flying for an hour, hour and a half or so on a combat sortie. Alright, now we're going to move on to landing. Landing is a little bit easier than the Spitfire, but it's still a lot more difficult than a P-47 or a P-51. If you air start, you definitely want to make sure that your tail wheel is locked. On an air start, it defaults to off, so go ahead and flip that landing, your tail wheel lock down, and make sure your tail wheel is locked. Alright, everything else is looking good for landing. Radiators are set to auto. We're going to open our landing gear push button cover, and our landing gear is up and locked as indicated by the red light. Now, as far as your gear speeds and flap speeds, you can bring the gear down at 350 kilometers an hour. Your flaps have a 250 kilometer an hour speed limit, so what you want to do is slow down to about 350, drop your gear, and continue slowing down. Your approach speed should be about 220 kilometers an hour in the pattern, and bringing that down to about 180 kilometers for touchdown. Alright, so let's go ahead and effect the landing. So I'll go ahead and come off and back to pause. I'm going to bring up my controls overlay, and as well as my foot camera for you guys, so you guys get to see exactly what's going on. Alright, so let's come off back to pause now. Ooh, better trim that out. Here's my main runway. Go ahead and throttle down. You do not have to worry about engine bearings in the 109. You guys might have seen my P-47 video. The engine bearing damage is a function of radial engines, not so much V12s, so you don't have to worry about engine bearings there. Alright, so 350, gear can come down. I'm going to go ahead and initiate a turn. I can hear the gear is down. I can hear the wind noise on it. Come up in power. 2 green lights. The gear is down and locked. And as you guys practice this, if you're new to this thing, I recommend using an airfield that has a large runway. Runways such as Anderson Air Force Base in Guam, that's a good one to start with. Manston on the Channel map, and also Normandy maps, if I believe. I think they expanded into having Manston on there. That is a very nice large runway. And I want to further slow down. I'm almost at 250, and I can start sending flaps down. And remember, it's that hand wheel right there. 250. 10 degrees. Slowing down some more. Get some more flaps out. Now, your flaps are indicated by the little black stripes on the trailing edges of the flaps themselves. Whenever you see a red stripe, they are as full down as they can be. I'm getting a little slow. I need to speed up a little. Definitely slow. Sorry about that, guys. Bring down my flaps the rest of the way. Red stripe, they are full down. Keep an eye out for my touchdown point. Remember, you want the aircraft to land when she wants to. Don't force the landing, otherwise you're gonna bounce, especially if you're too fast. Like I am currently. Just get over the runway, hold it level, bleed off that speed. Touchdown. I bounced. Alright, touchdown. Be ready on the brakes. Full aft on the stick to help slow down. Get some pressure on that tail wheel to help maintain directional control. So remember, your rudder is not very effective, especially at low speeds. And gently ease on the brakes. You don't want to nose over and wreck your engine that way. Success! Open your canopy, and you're good to go. That is a landing in a 109. And like I mentioned, that will take some practice. Alright everybody, hope you guys enjoyed that and found it helpful. I will be doing a follow-up video on this as far as combat employment goes. And with that, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.